I was watching Fallout. It's a dystopian series originally based on a game, and season one a few years ago struck me so strongly that I couldn't get it out of my mind. So I was rather pleased to see a second season. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending this. It is a gory show, too gory, in my opinion, but it's also so creative. One of the most wildly different shows that I've seen in a long time. I tend to fast forward through the ick and get to the next, oh my gosh, how did they think of that? Or how did they come up with that moment? But I digress. The point is, I was watching the show, and the character Hank, who is on a mission to turn humans into robots with personality, tells his daughter Lucy that the gold standard for personnel is the ISTP. That's the Myers-Briggs personality for somebody who is introverted, sensing, thinking, and perceiving. That cracked me up. They're talking about Myers-Briggs on a dystopian series. And the ISTP being the ideal personnel to hire is just, it's hysterical. Anyway, the same day that I saw that show clip, I'd also been reading Integrity First Selling by Mark Hunter. And in that book, he had been talking about personality and its impacts on your relationships and successes. He says, your words create logic, but your personality creates belief. Hi, I'm AK Helm from Boss at the Helm. Welcome to another mini but mighty leadership lesson. Every week, we publish a brief but impactful lesson to help you level up through your personal and professional development, with the focus on leadership mindset. In a prior week's episode, I mentioned that when something crosses my path more than once in a pretty rapid succession, I pause and pay attention. And so, since personality kept popping up on my radar, it felt like a good time for me to revisit a concept that we cover in our Helm workshops about personality, character, and how understanding personalities really helps you become a better leader of self and of others. Knowing your own traits, as well as the traits of your team or your colleagues, the people that you work with, can be a huge differentiator in the workplace in how you interact and how you communicate and how you approach and solve problems. Personality assessments are not ironclad. Each one of us has wiggle room in where we might fall in each of the categories. And more importantly, we are constantly evolving. Isn't that the magic? We can choose to change. Wonderful. So I'm not advocating that you rush right out and put everybody you know through a personality assessment, but if you can access a few of them, it can be very enlightening. And if you can do it with your team, with your colleagues, it can really help you each understand each other or start to have conversations that help you understand each other. These create awareness, and creating awareness is what Boss at the Helm is all about. Let's learn what we think, what we assume, how we act and engage, and how we try or show up every day. What I know to be true from my many years in corporate is that these assessments are available, but usually because it's pricey to roll out at volume, they're given to the C-suite or the senior executives or some specialty team who has decided to put the budget in for it. The other truth is, more often than not, the results come in and everybody looks at everybody else and goes, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that about you. Or I called that. I knew you were going to be that. And they don't try to incorporate their learning into their day-to-day interactions in business. Unlike Ray Dalio, who in his book Principles describes how he implements personality tests for all of his employees at Bridgewater to create radical transparency. He believes it helps everyone understand how people think and behave. And he has people keep their personality assessments posted like near their office or their desk so you can see it when you are working and engaging with them, keeping it top of mind that this person likes a moment to think and this person is a little bit more outgoing. I believe he's also partnered with Adam Grant and some others to create a new personality test that's available. You can Google it, look those up, look up other personality tests. I will mention a couple here, and then we're going to dive into the one that I tend to rely on more often. So some other tests include the Big Five, also called Ocean, the DISC assessment, Clifton Strengths, and even the Enneagram. I've seen that used in workplaces as well. The thing is, we're not trying to pick one assessment and say, go with that. This is the holy grail. No, this is about getting information where you can and learning from it. Now, obviously, some of these have a little bit more scientific backing. In fact, when I was looking up information on fallout, there was a Reddit thread where people were saying using the Myers-Briggs test to hire people was the equivalent of hiring somebody based on their astrological sign, which makes me laugh because I know a lot of people who would argue that hiring on your astrological sign might be helpful information. But I think the real thread here is there are many people in the scientific community who do not believe that the Myers-Briggs has as much rigorous testing and evidence to support it as something like the Big Five or Ocean, which is why that's the one I tend to use and refer to when we're doing Helm workshops. At the end of the day, this is not about pigeonholing anybody into a box and saying, you can only act like this because that's your personality assessment, and that's how I know how to engage with you. That's not it. We're looking at information, we're looking at leading tendencies, and what you can most likely expect from somebody when you engage with them. But we give people room to be humans, not robots. So going back to that Reddit thread and the theme of disbelief that some of you have, I'm going to put it down to this. Do you believe that we have introverts and extroverts? And maybe people who can play both sides of the field, ambiverts? Do you quickly know which one you would label yourself? If your answer is yes, then keep going. We've got some really helpful practical tips coming up about how to understand personalities and how to use them in your leadership. If your answer is no, 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 people are not extroverts or introverts or ambiverts or any of those things, then you might not be ready for this video yet. Everyone else, let's keep going. If you've been watching Boss at the Helm, Many But Mighty leadership lessons for a while, then you know that I really like and appreciate Vanessa Van Edwards' work. She is so good at using her research and her experience to explain how we relate to each other, what our body language says, and also diving into these big five personality types. The reason I like her approach is she doesn't just say there's 5 types and here's what they mean. She goes further to the part that matters and says, if you or someone you're relating to is high in this particular trait or low in this particular trait, they tend to prefer this type of interaction. They want to be acknowledged for these types of traits. They really shine when they get to show particular traits, and they stumble or you need to be aware when other types of traits show up. So she goes through all of these from the Big Five perspective. I encourage you to look her up, Vanessa Van Edwards, The Signs of People. You can also look up Big Five Ocean personality assessment. Both of those are very helpful for you to understand more about personalities. So how does all this understanding personality traits help you in leadership? First of all, you get to know your own traits and preferences, how you engage, your communication style, how you participate or don't. Pay attention to how you engage, how you prefer to communicate, how you participate or don't, and the people you tend to react to versus engage with. Second, it helps you get to know your team and colleagues. You can use those inputs for how you might engage differently with people, how you might plan your communications depending on a particular person or group that you're working with. As a leader of others, it can help you with individual coaching. What traits might need to be developed in a person on your team? Or what trait do they have that you want to really polish and help them focus on? What will help them be successful in this role or the next role? How do you develop their own self-awareness in groups and team building? You can look at who's going to make an aligned pairing in a group where there's going to be less buffering and frustration, or coaching those who do not get along because they're constantly frustrating each other, helping them understand and see different perspectives. You can also look at this when you're making assignments. Who presents spontaneity? Who needs a little bit more time to consider and respond? And what are the projects or tasks that align best with those particular assignments? What about roles and responsibilities? Personally, I think this is the biggest advantage to understanding personalities in the workplace. As you seek to develop your team, but also to grow the company to meet your goals, you look all around you and you'll find people working in particular roles or who have responsibilities that they don't necessarily shine at. Sometimes people are forced into roles. Sometimes they grow into them and they grow out of them. There's a lot of reasons for how each of us ends up in our roles and with the responsibilities that we have. And as a great leader, as a great developer of individuals, and to make your team even better, your ability to suss out and understand if somebody is the right fit for a particular role or responsibility. Do they do well with routine and predictability and data analytics, but they happen to be in an environment that is constantly changing and requires spontaneity? That's something you want to pay attention to. Doesn't mean that those people can't be stars for you. It means they may not be in the right role or environment, or maybe even have the right empowerment to really shine and do their best. Ultimately, Understanding personalities helps you lead yourself and others. And that's so boss. As I mentioned, I tend to use the big five in workshops that we do at the Helm. And we look into characteristics of people who fall into high or low out of the five categories. Now, actually, we only do four out of the five categories because Vanessa Van Edwards says that neuroticism, the fifth category, is almost 50% genetics. So we set that one to the side and we concentrate on openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness. I often find that my workshop participants get confused about two particular areas, high and low. It doesn't mean good and bad. It doesn't mean right and wrong. It means you tend to find yourself more aligned with certain characteristics in certain traits. And those characteristics will put you in the high or the low category, not right or wrong, and changeable. If you realize that you are low open, you can change it. You can do something about it. Set your intentions, start taking actions, observe, and adjust. That's the Helm method. High and low is not good or bad. It's not right or wrong. For the sake of time, we won't go into each of these from a high and low perspective, but let's take one so that you can begin to get a sense of it. And then I do encourage you to go understand more about the big five traits. So extroversion, that's one of the traits. And many of us are very familiar with it. Introvert and extrovert. What we would say is an introvert, it tends to be more shy or reserved, and an extrovert tends to be more boisterous and outgoing. Simplistic, but in general, we all know that. Now, there's also a word for the middle of the range, somebody who can play both sides. Maybe they tend to be more introverted, but they can be an extrovert in certain circumstances. Hi, that's me. An ambivert is the name for that. So, extroversion, high extroversion, an extrovert tends to be very outgoing, assertive, sociable, and talkative. They seek out environments and situations where people are around. They get energy by engaging with people. They appreciate from other people enthusiasm. And they really shine when they can be charismatic and popular. What we watch out for with extroverts is when they're not in the right environment or they don't have the right stimulus and appreciation, they can be rude or easily bored or bossy. Okay, so that's high extroversion, an extrovert. What's low extroversion? Low extroversion is somebody who tends to be shy, reserved, private, inhibited even, and they seek out opportunities to have space and quiet, more so than somebody who is extroverted, for example. They appreciate the opportunity for solitude, and they really shine when they have an opportunity to be thoughtful and observant. We watch out for them when they get lonely or passive or when they are unheard. I think the most helpful part from a leadership perspective goes beyond understanding what high extroversion or low extroversion is. I think it's when you really dive into what are they looking for? What type of environment do they seek? Where do they feel appreciated? When do they really shine? What environment makes them shine? And what do we watch out for? And the power of this is not just recognizing that that's who somebody is, but in understanding how you relate to that. If you're also high extroversion, you'll be a little bit more charismatic with them. If you are low extroversion, engaging with high extroversion, and you really want that opportunity to engage, you'll remember things like they're going to talk more than you prefer. You'll maybe bank your energy before you go into a meeting with them. Or you may say something to them, which I have done many times in small group meetings with extroverts. I will look at them and say, hey, you know what? I just need an extra minute to process this. I want to respond to you. If you need to keep the conversation going, great. I'll happily spend a few minutes with you in an aside later, sharing some of my thoughts and perspectives. That really makes people pause. For people who don't need as much time to actively respond and engage in a conversation, it makes them go, oh, wow, okay, but I want to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to give you a chance to say it, whether I can make room for you in this conversation or we can take a few minutes aside later. Learning how you relate to others, what other people appreciate and respect, and what you appreciate and respect helps you speak up and advocate for yourself, helps you set your boundaries, and it helps you choose to engage with others differently than you prefer. Now, on that point alone, I know I'm going to get some kickback, so we'll address that in a few minutes. Let's take this further and talk about how you think about it when it comes to roles. Let's say that you're leading a team, you're working with multiple individuals in different roles. Maybe you have somebody on your data analytics team and they're more reserved, they need time to consider an answer, and you've got your most extroverted team members running roughshod over them in group settings. That's an opportunity for you as a leader to have individualized coaching. Dear data analytics person, prepare your thoughts in advance. Be ready for us to call on you. We're going to give you time to speak up. We want to hear your voice. And dear, very outgoing extroverted individuals, I'm going to ask you to be engaged in the meeting, but also pause and give time to others to share their perspective. We need to hear everybody's points of view. What about that person on your sales team who just continuously isn't making their numbers? They have most of the right steps and actions, really the best customer CRM data out of anybody on the team. And as you start to dig into it, you understand that that's the part they love. They like filling out the data and keeping the records up to date, but they don't like making the outbound calls or going to customer meetings. That doesn't mean they don't have a spot on your sales team, but it does mean you might want to reconfigure how they use them. Maybe they take on more of the data handling and processing for your CRM and use it to help your best hunters and gatherers. It's going to be up to you and your environment, but understanding some of these personality traits and interests helps you make the right choices to get the most out of your team and organization, as well as to develop and support individuals. Got 2 or 3 people who are constantly butting heads every time they communicate? Take a look at their personality traits and then work to coach them based on that towards common ground. Sometimes we are so unaware about others. We think everybody should get it the same way, the same speed, the same form of communication. And that is the magic here. You can help people understand who operates one way versus another and how to communicate with them a little bit better. Look at the traits. You may personally lean towards a certain high or low trait. You may think you want most of the people on your team, but compare that to what you're asking people to do, what their role and responsibility is. Do you want a detective to be accepting and compliant, or detached and analytical so they can step back from the scene and really find the perpetrators? You've got roles like that all through your organization. Figure out what those roles do best with, and then help people align to it. In all cases, I encourage you to get to know yourself, your beliefs, and your assumptions. I disagree with Hank from Fallout. I don't think the world is better with only one personality type. I don't think work is better with only one personality type. What makes it better is when we're aware and intentionally choosing and knowing our impact matters. Start with yourself, and then lead others. Be a boss. Join us here next Friday for more Mini But Mighty leadership lessons. By the way, now is a great time to tap like and subscribe to this channel. We'll see you next week.